So we did come to say some Hidushim on these most difficult parashiyot. You know, this is not a leap year, or this is a leap year, so we really can't divert to Purim or to the Arba parashiyot. So we really forced to stick to the Parashat Shavua itself. Now again, these are technical issues. Parashat Terumah was talking about the construction of the Mishkan. Parashat Tetzaveh talks about the Begadim. I would like tonight just to focus on one word in Parashat Tetzaveh, if I may. I have three resolutions to the question that I'm going to ask. So I'll ask the question, I'll give you the three answers, I'll wish you good night, and everybody will live happily ever after. If you look at Parashat Tetzaveh, you see in the beginning of the parasha it says V'yikru elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor. God is talking to Moshe. V'yikru elecha. What does it mean V'yikru elecha? Take for yourself shemen zayit, olive oil, and katit lamaor, obviously for the menorah, and la'alot ner tamid, in order to light the menorah. Now before I get to my issue, I just had a side question. Isn't something missing here? It says you should take olive oil. Well, shouldn't it say first you should make the olive oil? In the Mishkan, everything was v'asita, 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 v'asu, v'asita. Now when it comes to the olive oil, Borei Olam forgets the process. And it's a process, it's special oil, first press and all that. There's no process here. V'lakachta. You should take it. If I was writing the Pasuk, I probably would have said, Ve'atat tetzaveh b'nei Yisrael v'ya'asu shemen zayit zach v'yichru, and then take it. What happened to the making of the shemen zayit? To my good fortune, boys, I found out that Ramban asked this question. And the Ramban has a very, very simple answer. He says, you know why it does not say make the oil? Because it was impossible, physically impossible to make shemen zayit in the Midbar. For one good reason. No olives. No olives. If anybody ever went to the Sahara Desert, there's no olives. Oh, so what? So then the Ramban says, okay, very good. So you couldn't make it, so if you couldn't make it, how'd you take it? Oh, so he gives a similar answer. He says that when the Jews came out of Mitzrayim, just like we learned that they took wood for the Kirashim, we have a tradition that they also brought out oil in order to light the menorah. So therefore, Moshe did not need to make the oil. All he was had to take it from the Nisi'im that brought the oil with them. Although, I did a mathematical calculation, we're not getting too complicated. They must have brought out a lot of oil. Because if you do the Heshbon, they had to light the menorah every night for 40 years. Now, the menorah holds 3.5 log of oil. Now, a log, let's just be, again, estimate, about 10 ounces is a log. So if you have 3.5 log a night, they're about 30 ounces. 30 ounces a night for 40 years. I mean, just do the math, Rabbi. You're talking over here, 30 times 365 times 40. They had to bring out an oil tanker. A few of them, if that's going to be the amount of oil. So the Ramban just makes, they brought the oil out with them. Well, how much oil can they bring out with them?
But it didn't, on the way, throughout 40 years, they went to places.
But they had to light the menorah every night in the Mishkan.
They didn't look for places or take from places.
They went to the olive oil factory, maybe.
One of the stops on the way.
Okay. Maybe. Anyway, so I saw one of the Mefarshim, they want to answer it that based on the Midrash. There's a Midrash that says that of Hanina Segan Kohanim was a Kohen Gadol in the second Bet HaMikdash. He was a deputy Kohen, and he said, as long as he was in the Bet HaMikdash, they only lit the menorah on Rosh Hashanah, and it would stay lit the whole year long. So we could fairly say then, if that miracle happened in the Bet HaMikdash, where they lit it once a year, and for sure they were on a higher level in the Midbar, so it could be that was the miracle that happened, and therefore you don't have to light it every night. It was lit, once a year, so they only have to light it 40 times. Although They asked this question to Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. They asked Rav Chaim, they said, how could that midrash be true? The Torah says you have to light the menorah. So how is it possible to say that they lit it once on Rosh Hashanah, it lasted the whole year? So Rav Chaim, classic Rav Chaim answer, he answers using the Rambam. He says the Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat talks about the melacha of havara. You're not allowed to be maf'ir on Shabbat, to make a fire. So he says, not only are you not allowed to make a fire, but adding oil to an existing flame is also the isur of havara. So Rav Chaim says, you see from over here, that to light something, you don't have to physically light it, but even if you add oil, that's considered havara. So mistama, every night they just added a little drop of oil into the menorah, and that's how they fulfill it. But it still works for us. In the midbar, they only had to light it 40 times, and every night they came and added a drop of oil into the cups, and therefore you had havara. So again, it answers the question. They didn't have to bring out some, oil tanker with them out of Mitzrayim. It just makes it a little more plausible.
Isn't part of the avodah also cleaning out the cups?
It seems that the avodah of cleaning out the cups, if it's needed to be cleaned out.
Once a year.
No, right. When you need to clean it out, if you don't need to clean it out, you don't clean it out. Yes?
Vadia's wife had the infinite jug of oil.
Hazak Baruch. But that's the question is, Ovadia wasn't in the midbar with them. Anyway, so now we get to the issue. What does it really mean when it says v'yikru elecha? Why are they bringing the oil to Moshe in the first place? It's not elecha, it's not his oil. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu, who's not the Kohen, Aaron's the Kohen? By the way, lighting the menorah, you don't even need a Kohen. Lighting the menorah is even kosher by a Zar. So what does it mean over here? Shemen Zayid v'yikru elecha. That's my question. What is this word elecha? Why is it taken to Moshe? Now, unless you tell me, v'yikru, take it and give it to the Mishkan, like everything else. Elecha sounds personal. This is not personal. Does Moshe Rabbeinu have something personal with this olive oil that it's v'yikru elecha? Take it and give it to the Mishkan. So the Ramban again answers this. Ramban says something very simple. He says the Shemen Zayit had to be Zach. Zach means pure, filtered, without any dregs, without any impurities.
Extra virgin.
Hazak Baruch, first press. So Zach is a certain quality of the oil. Moshe was the mashgiach to give the approval that this oil is indeed kasher. So v'yikru elecha for your hashkaha. Well, as we would say today in the vernacular, Moshe was the quality control. They brought the olive oil to him, and he had to come along and say, Zach, v'yikru elecha, bitur inspection. With this, I answered a big question that always bothered me. I know today's Purim Katam, but let's go to Hanukkah Gadol for a second. Hanukkah, we have the Gemara that says the Ivanim came in and they defiled the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, Hazak Baruch. And they touched all the oils, they moved all the oils. And when the Hashmonaim came in, they found Pach Shemen Ahad Shaya Munach, that was in the corner, untouched, B'chotamo shel Kohen Gadol, and it had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Where do we see in rabbinic literature that the olive oil in the Beit HaMikdash has to have the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it? Where do we see this? Yeah, the seal of the Kohen Gadol. We take it for granted because that's what we learned when we were kids. Oh, Chotamo shel Kohen Gadol. Kilu, that's like a fact. Why is the Kohen Gadol putting a seal on oil? I mean, by the way, there was minachot, there was flour. We don't see the Kohen Gadol putting his seal on the flour for the minachot or the yayin for the nesachim. Pshat is, based on this Rambam, we have a very good understanding that the oil needed hashkaha for its zachness. And therefore Moshe did it when he was around. And after Moshe, who's in charge? The Kohanim. And therefore the Kohen Gadol. And therefore that chotam of the Kohen Gadol was just to verify that this shemen is actually kasher, zach, katit lamaor. Evantem? So that's the first answer. Yes?
What's the literal definition of zach?
Pure. Without any impurities or dregs.
Something to check it to
That's
see
right. Yes, check it. Great question. I want to tell you how the Meshech Chochmah learns. Meir Sirhat Kohen Medevinsky. Meshech Chochmah says something stunning. Something stunning. He says, V'yiku elecha sounds like for you, for your benefit. Like in Lech Lecha, when God told Abraham, Lech Lecha, Rashi says, Letovatcha lehana'atcha. So when it says V'yiku elecha, it means take the olive oil, and Moshe, you have an interest to take the olive oil. You have a benefit to take the olive oil. It says the Meshech Chochmah. What's the benefit to Moshe? I mean, he's not reselling it. He doesn't have a gas station, like you said. He's got to take the oil and give it to the Kohanim to light. So, what's the hana'atcha v'tovatcha that Moshe has to give the oil? So, Meshech Chochmah brings us to an Ibn Ezra in the beginning of Parashat Ba'alotecha. In Ba'alotecha, it's talking about the lighting of the menorah. The Ibn Ezra reveals to us a tremendous secret. He says we know from Pesukim that God only communicated to Moshe during the day. God communicates to the prophets of the Goyim by night, under the cloak of darkness. But to the prophets of the Jews, Moshe specifically, B'yom diber Hashem el Moshe. God communicates to Moshe during the day.
Also night or just day?
Huh?
Also night or just day?
No, just day. So therefore, says the Ibn Ezra, but he also appears to Moshe as long as there's light in the Mishkan, as long as the menorah is lit. What's the pshat in the Ibn Ezra? He's saying that when it says that God only communicates to Moshe in the day, it doesn't mean in the day. It means during the light time. And therefore, even at night, as long as the menorah is lit in the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu can get reception. The Abarbanel says it makes sense. Because otherwise, the greatest prophet, you're saying half the day doesn't get prophecy? That's hard to understand. As long as there's light, Moshe Rabbeinu has clarity of mind. When there's light, there's simcha, and therefore the prophecy can fall upon him. Says the Meshech Chochmah, says the Ibn Ezra, that's what it means. If you go to Parashat Ba'alotecha, you'll see right before Ba'alotecha, the last pasuk in Parashat Naso says that God appeared on top of the Kiruvim, Vaydaber Elav, and spoke to Moshe. When? Ba'alotecha menorah. So you see, the communication that God has with Moshe is directly linked with what? Ba'alotecha nerot. There's a juxtaposition between God speaking to Moshe and the lighting of the menorah. What's the connection? Because as long as the menorah was lit, God was talking to Moshe. Hevantem? Uses the Meshech Chochmah, this Ibn Ezra, to say, V'yiku elecha. Take the Shemen Zayim, Moshe, because you have an interest to take the Shemen Zayim, because as long as the Shemen Zayim can be lit in the menorah, I can talk to you. So therefore, elecha letovatcha ulhana'atcha. Hevantem? Nobody has the benefit besides Moshe. Because Moshe Rabbeinu now takes this oil and now delivers it to the menorah. Moshe gets the greatest benefit. Why? Because there's light now in the Mishkan. And if there's light in the Mishkan, Vaydaber Elav. With this, the Meshech Chochmah says a beautiful pshat in the pasuk in our parasha. He says, Be'oel mo'ed michutz taparochet asher ala'idut יערוך אותו אהרון ובניו מערב עד בוקר לפני השם, יוסף את המנורה. חוקת עולם לדורותם. And this lighting of the menorah is a hok for the future generations, says Meshech Chochmah. For the generation of Moshe, the lighting of the menorah is not a hok. The lighting of the menorah makes perfect sense. You need light for Moshe to get prophecy, therefore light. But in the generation after Moshe, now what are you lighting the menorah for? Chukat olam ledorotam. For the future generations, this mitzvah indeed will turn into a chok. But not as long as Moshe Rabbeinu was alive. We have a very good reason why you have to light the menorah. Because we need Moshe to receive the prophecy when it's still light. Got it, boys? So now we have two answers. The first pshat in Elecha is what? Inspection. The second pshat in Elecha is what? To receive prophecy. And now we get to the main event. The main event of the night. Elecha. You know, we learn in Parshat Tetzaveh a lot from what wasn't said in Parshat Tetzaveh. You boys go to yeshiva, so whenever you're learning, you always have to learn two things. What do we learn from the written word, and what do we learn from the omitted word? And be surprised, you can learn a lot from the words that are not said. And if you know in Parshat Tetzaveh, there's one word that's missing, which is a very important word that's actually written almost in every parasha, and that's the name of Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu's name is not written in Parshat Tetzaveh. Yeah. Go check, there's 101 Pesukim. That's why the beginning of the parasha starts, V'ata. God specifically doesn't say, V'daber Adonai Moshe Demor. Very rare, V'ata, you. Hey, who are you? You know my name? I'm not mentioning your name in this week's parasha. The question is, why is that so? Why should we have a parasha that doesn't have Moshe Rabbeinu's name? Very rare occurrence. The Baal HaTurim brings it to our attention that in this week's parasha, Ki Tisa, after the sin of the golden calf, so what does God say to Moshe? Leave me alone. I will destroy them in 1 second. What does Moshe Rabbeinu answer? God, if you erase them from history, erase me also. V'im ayin, if you erase them, meheni na misifrecha, erase me from the book. That's a big statement for Moshe Rabbeinu to say. So God said, okay, Moshe, you know what? I'm not going to erase them. So that means if they're not going to get erased, you're not erased either. Because you only stipulated to be erased if they get erased. But the Gemara says, the words of Tzaddikim will always leave an impression. The words of a Tzaddik, even though they were said stipulatively, meaning on condition, but since Moshe Rabbeinu said, Meheni na misifrecha, it's gotta have some effect somewhere. But what do you mean? I said Meheni, if you're going to erase them, you didn't erase them, so don't erase me. But it came out of the mouth of the Tzaddik. So therefore God says, I'm going to erase you from one parasha to fulfill your words. And which parasha did God choose? Parshat Tetzaveh. Hence, no name. I asked a simple question. Why Tetzaveh? I mean, you want to say, okay, you have to erase them, fine. You have a lot of parashiyot, by the way. Unless maybe in something Moshe Rabbeinu said, it's connected to Tetzaveh. Which parasha in the Torah is Tetzaveh? Which number parasha? Well, I did the math before I came. There's 12 parashiyot in Bereshit. Tetzaveh is the 8th parasha in Shemot. So it is parasha number 20. What was Moshe Rabbeinu's words? Meheni na erase me misifrecha. Says the Hidah, misifrecha misefer chaf. So therefore, since if you break down Mesifrecha, you get Mesifrecha from the 20th book. So therefore, in his words, it's as if saying the 20th parasha. So therefore, God says we're going to be literal. You said Mesifrecha, Sefercha. That's why. Yes, sir.
I don't understand. We know in the end of the day, Hashem is the Moshe.
Hashem.
Listen to Moshe.
That's my point. But since the Tzaddik said it, nonetheless, the words of the Tzaddik. You're right. I'm not talking about my words or your words. We can say things, they're not going to have too much Roshem, by the way. But when the tzaddik says something, his words are so cutting and binding that even though the stipulation was not met, the Meheni Naz got to land. That's what Gemara says. Yes, sir.
Where do we see that Bnei Israel's erased?
Where do we see?
Bnei Israel.
They were not. That's the point. Even though Bnei Israel were not erased, and Moshe Rabbeinu only said to erase him if they get erased, since he said erase me, what else has to happen to you?
We have this in a few places.
Yes, that's the power of the words of the tzaddik.
Where's Chida?
This Lafhida is on the parasha in Nahal Kedumim. Yes, sir.
The words of the tzaddik mean a lot, but don't the words of Hashem mean a lot, even more so?
What did Hashem say?
Moshe's words.
Oh, so what did Hashem say?
Only they erase.
I said, what were the words of Hashem over here?
Erase.
He said, erase me if you do erase them.
That's God. That's Moshe's words.
Yeah.
So you're saying doesn't God's words have a lot? What did God say here?
He said, I'm going to destroy them.
Right, and then God said, God said, leave me alone, and I will destroy them. Yes, by the way, the Gemara says that the Jewish people did not get destroyed in that generation. Borei Olam would punish them subsequently in every generation a little. So God's words also came true. But what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, if you destroy them immediately, then destroy me immediately. Take me away, because I'm not going to do that. Good. But you stop me erased because you said it. The Balaturim also reminds us that there's a reason why it's mentioned this week's Parashah, because Parashat Tetzaveh will always come out in the week of Zayin Adar, which is the yortzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, how appropriate. The week that Moshe Rabbeinu is not there, so when you get to the Parashah, he's missing. So everybody says, oh, where is he? He went missing. Yeah, he died this week. So therefore, Tetzaveh is the best Parashah. It's almost like a commemoration of the passing of Moshe. Now, I'd just like to say one word that Rav Zalman Saruskin said in his Oznaim LaTorah. Most people, I'm sure, last week were not aware that Zayin Adar even came. Yeah, most people are not aware of Zayin Adar. They're more aware of when President's Day is than when Zayin Adar is. It's one of those days where, oh, it was today? And then the next question is, oh, what do you do? And nobody knows. Nobody knows, do you say Tahanun? Do you skip Tahanun? Is there a reading? I would venture to say that more people light candles for Rabbi Nachman from Breslov than for Moshe Rabbeinu. You know, nobody knows what the day is. It's a very uncelebrated or unrecognized day, says Rav Zalman Saruskin. And you know what he says? It's by design. Because look at the religion of the Goyim. Their whole religion is about the guy. And what's their biggest holiday? When he was born. And what's their second biggest holiday? When he died. And their whole religion is based on the guy. If you believe in the guy, you get forgiveness. If you believe in the guy, you get Olam Haba. God says in Judaism, it's not about Moshe. And therefore, we don't fuss when he was born. We don't fuss when he died. We don't even know where he's buried. How do you like that? In our religion, it's all about God. Even in the Haggadah Shel Pesach, as we know, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is practically not mentioned. For good reason, because we don't want the night of Pesach to be a tribute about Moshe. We want the tribute to be given to Borei Olam. So look at the difference. So they were Adrabah, on the day of the yortzeit, you would think, oh, maybe the parasha should only talk about Moshe. This is his yortzeit. Adrabah, he goes missing. On purpose, to show that he went missing. Whoever knows, knows, and whoever doesn't know, let them keep on serving God. We don't want to overemphasize the Shaliyah, because that would take away from the essence, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Question.
The Rambam still has it as one of the Yudgim Karim, no?
Which is what?
In terms of believing that Moshe is the world is true, and Moshe was a good.
I'm not erasing Moshe from history.
I know, but I'm saying in terms of like.
But you cannot deny, we do not have a holiday celebrating Moshe's birth, nor do we have a holiday celebrating his death, nor do most people even know the day came and went. And the reason why on his yortzeit his name is missing in the parasha is, again, don't fuss about that. Is he the greatest prophet? 1,000%. But that doesn't mean the religion revolves around Moshe. But in the other religions, that's the centerpiece of the religion. The son is more important than the father. And it's not the son, I understand that. But l'shitata makozebet. Evanta? Evanta, do you understand?
I don't know what was ever.
According to their false premise. Okay. But I would like to offer another explanation over here. And it's based on a Midrash Tanhuma. I found a very, how should I tell you, strange Midrash Tanhuma. Shemin Zayit, it's mentioned in this week's Parashah. Do we have another time in the Torah that Shemin Zayit is mentioned before this? Well, the Tanhuma couldn't find a match for Shemin Zayit, but it found a definite match for the word Zayit. Where do we see the word Zayit in the Torah before this? Very good. Parashat Noah. Noah is on the Teva for a year, wants to know if the flood subsided. They didn't have Weather Channel in those days. So he has to do it the old-fashioned way. He sends out a scouting bird, And the raven went out and did some hakafot around the teva and come back with a report. So he sends out the Yonah, the dove. And what happens with the dove? The dove comes back, he has a olive branch in his mouth, which is an indication that the world is regenerated, the world is growing again, therefore Noah knew it was over. So the Midrash writes, Bnei Yisrael are compared to a Yonah. Like it says in Shir HaShirim, Yonati, Tamati. So therefore, Hinach Yafa Einayich Yonim, also Shir HaShirim. So just like the Yonah brought a Zayit back to Noah and brought light to the world, that's telling Noah good news, so too Bnei Yisrael, God says, bring light to the world by bringing Shem and Zayit, Hatat and Tetzaveh, Bnei Yisrael. So the Midrash, there's something incredible over here. It says, if you really want to understand what's going on over here, Noah. Devre Torah, Ashirim b'makom echad, or Aniyim b'makom echad, v'Ashirim b'makom echad. We have a rule. Sometimes Torah is impoverished in one place and rich in a different place. Sometimes if you want to understand the sugya in one area, you have to reference somewhere else and it'll shed light on our subject. So I think what the Midrash is telling us, if you want to know the secret of Parshat Tetzaveh and Shem and Zayit knows business, you're not going to get it from Tetzaveh. You got to go study Parashat Noah. Now that's bold, because I would not have connected the dots from Tetzaveh to Noah. I didn't even think they were connected remotely. But the Midrash is already tipping us off. That's where the secret is. Now, the Arizal also, that's mine, just don't pay attention. The Arizal also tipped us off. What did the Arizal say? The Arizal says that Moshe Rabbeinu carried the neshamot of some previous personalities. Gentlemen, we're introducing to you tonight the sword of Gilgul Neshamot. Now, you don't have to dim the lights for this, but there is a concept of Gilgul Neshamot, that Neshamot are reincarnated and come back. You want to read more about this topic, the Arizal of Chaim Vital wrote a book called Shara Gilgulim. It's the who's who. He tells you who is this person, AKA. Although you see him as Moshe, but who is he representing from a previous life? It's such a beautiful limud, Shara Gilgulim, only because then you start to understand, that's why he's doing what he's doing. Because it's rectifying what his mistake was, and that's why he behaves like this, because he's really like that. It reveals a tremendous window into understanding the lives of people when you really know where they came from.
Who is it by?
Shara Gilgulim.
By who?
By Rav Chaim Vital.
Is it anywhere you can buy it?
You can buy it anywhere, but you probably can't learn it anywhere. Art Scroll hasn't, translated it.
English translation.
No, I did see an English translation of Shara Gilgulim, actually. I did see it. The big book.
You can't understand half.
Off the record, is
You
it?
can't.
It's probably not very good.
Right. How?
Understand it? It's hard to understand.
The English actually is good, but it's a limud. You don't learn this over a cup of coffee. You gotta learn. Anyway, Shara Gilgulim writes. Arizal actually writes. Moshe Rabbeinu was carrying at one point in his life the neshama of a fellow called Shet, son of Adam. He's neglected. Everybody knows Cain and Hevel, but after Cain and Hevel was Shet. If you look in Devrei Yamim, Adam Shet is the second generation. One day, billionaire boys, I'll come back and I'll give you the story of Shet, which is not mentioned too much in the Torah, and why he had to be reincarnated, and why Moshe Rabbeinu had to fix him. Stay tuned. The second personality that Moshe Rabbeinu needed to fix was Noah. Okay, now you're talking. Now, by the way, it's interesting to point out that there are some direct connections. Once the Arizal points it out, you say, wow, they both have something incredibly in common. They both lived in the Teva. Noah lived in the Teva. When Moshe Rabbeinu was born, the first thing his mother did was what? After 3 months? Put him in a Teva. And by the way, Moshe makes a comment of how they tarred the Teva of Noah on the inside and how they tarred the Teva of Moshe on the outside, so the tzaddik doesn't have to smell it. So already you see the link in that. The flood lasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Moshe Rabbeinu would receive the Torah after 40 days and 40 nights. Noah would build the Teba over the course of 120 years. Moshe lives 120 years. So there's a lot of, and many more. Of course, their lives are connected. The Arizal says, if you look at the last word of last week's parasha, Terumah, anybody know the last word of last week's parasha? No way you can know by heart. I'll read it to you. Nechoshet. And the next word is what? Ve'ata. Says the Arizal, Nechoshet ve'ata, Noah shet ve'ata. So, again, Nechoshet ve'ata. Nechoshet, Noah shet ve'ata, which represents the three Gilgulim of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, that means the Arizal in Parashat Tetzaveh is introducing Noah. Nechoshet ve'ata. So already, it's not only the Midrash Tanhumah that's taking us back to Noah. The Arizal is telling us right here, Nechoshet ve'ata. So therefore, we need to delve into this this connection a little deeper.
Sorry, who was the Gilgulim of Moshe? You said
Shet and Noah.
who's the third one?
Himself?
You said
Ve'ata, you.
I can be a Gilgulim of yourself.
It's not a Gilgul. He represents himself. He has a neshama of his own. And he wasn't only a carrier for other neshamot. He was himself. So therefore, Noah shet ve'ata. He needs a tikkun also, Moshe, whatever he came down to the world to betaken. Now watch.
Could we get a quick shakalotaya on this thing? Before we go deeper?
What do you want?
On the reason, quick shakalotaya.
You have a question he asked?
No.
Shakalatari months.
What do you mean, Shakavat? What you asking?
Like, what we just spoke about, like 2 seconds.
You want to review it?
Yeah.
Gilgulim. It's that there's three Gilgulim.
Sometimes you have neshamot that lived in one generation, and because of sins that they made, those neshamot need to be rectified. So in order to rectify it, God sends those neshamot in a different generation, in a different person, and situations will present themselves. And if the person in the new generation succeeds, he doesn't only fix himself, but he also fixes the neshama of the previous. That's the sort of Gilgul neshama. The prophet Yeshaya, when he talks about the flood, the great flood as we call it, he calls it Men Noah. Men Noah, in the vernacular we would say Noah's flood, or the way we would say it in the modern world, Hurricane Noah. Now, that's not flattering when they name a hurricane after you. And if your grandmother's name was Sandy, it was quite embarrassing after what happened with that hurricane. There was a lot of jokes on anybody who was named after a hurricane. So the Zohar HaKadosh says not flat, and they weren't up to the letter N either when they named it Hurricane Noah. So therefore, the Zohar HaKadosh says, why would they call it Man Noah? As if to say it's his fault. It's Man Noah. It's his fault. Says the Zohar. Why is it his fault? Exactly. The Zohar HaKadosh says, when God came to Noah and said, I'm destroying the world. Now there's a law in maritime law. Maritime law is that the captain must go down with the ship. When there was a story a couple of years ago, there was a ship that was going down off the coast of Greece. And when the Coast Guard came on the ship, they're looking for the captain. And the captain's missing. Where is he? He went to a bar. He escaped. He was drinking beers in Athens. And they put him in jail. It's a federal crime. The captain cannot leave the ship. In this case, Noah not only did not go down with the ship, he took the ship. He left it. He went on the ship and everybody drowned. What is he expected to do? Well, maybe if Noah would have been a little more concerned for his generation. Noah was a tzaddik, we don't say no. And maybe if Noah would have said, listen, if you kill them, kill me. But he didn't. Noah said, you're killing them? Kapara. I'm good? Yeah, you're good. Okay, that's it. So there's a claim. Noah, what are you doing? The leader has to defend the nation and be Moshe Nefesh for his people. In Yeshiva, they talk about Noah. They talk about Noah as a tzaddik in a fur coat. You ever hear that saying? What do they mean to say? Noah as a tzaddik in pelts. It's a tzaddik in a fur coat. What do they mean to say? Come into a room, it's freezing cold. So one guy says, wow, it's cold in here. What does he do? He puts a fur coat on. Now what? He warmed himself, but everybody else is still freezing. Another guy comes into the room and says, wow, it's cold in here. He makes a fire. Now everybody gets warm. He said, no, I was a tzaddik in a fur coat. He saved himself. But what about everybody else? So the Navi comes along and says, man, Noah, that needed rectification. So much so, by the way. Answer the question, boys. Noah going on to the Teva. Is that a reward or a punishment? Very good. Never answer a question like that, boys. It's always a setup. Always say it depends. That's the first thing they teach you in the Rabbanut. Anytime a question comes to you, you can answer yes or no. You're rolling dice. It's 50-50. But if you say depends, you're always right, because everything always depends on something. So therefore, my question again, is Noah going into a reward or a punishment? It depends. And you're 100% right. 100% right, exactly. What does it depend on? Well, if you're looking at it from the angle of that it saved his life, it's a blessing. But if you look at the way he got saved, it's a curse. I mean, the Teva had to be a very, very uncomfortable existence. You're living in a zoo for 1 year. The stench on the Teva, there was no ventilation, there were no windows. And he's up 24 hours a day feeding all the animals. Now, if God really wanted to save Noah, he could have sent him to Israel. There was no flood there, according to Hazal. Send him on a free paid expense trip and have a sabbatical in Israel. The Pasuk says, Bo el Teva. You know why I'm telling you to go on the Teva and not to Israel? Ki otecha ra'iti tzaddik lefanai. You're a tzaddik, but your tzidkut is lefanai. You didn't defend the people. Bador hazeh, in this generation that was so corrupt, you were willing to forget the generation, only worry about yourself. Therefore, I'm going to save you, but it's not going to be a comfortable saving. So it needed to be fixed. Little French boys, you know what deja vu is? Mm-hmm. Now we're going to have deja vu. Many years later, comes Moshe Rabbeinu. And what does God tell Moshe? I'm destroying the whole people. I'm going to get rid of everybody in a second. Almost similar to what God told Noah. Now Moshe Rabbeinu is being told the same thing. At that point, the Arizal says, Noah's neshama went into Moshe. Because Moshe's reaction has the ability now to rectify what Noah did not do in a previous generation. So if Moshe Rabbeinu would have said, you're going to erase them? Good luck! Then Noah would have said, you know. But in this case, what did Moshe Rabbeinu say? If you erase them, take me down with the ship. At that point, Noah was applauding, Baruch Hashem, I'm finally fixed. Moshe Rabbeinu fixes Noah. Says the Hidah, that's what was Moshe Rabbeinu's words that he uses. Meheni. Meheni is otiyot men Noah. The whole sin of Noah was what? Men Noah. It's Noah, Hurricane Noah. He came to fix men Noah. Meheni. And if you take the two words Meheni na is otiyot min Noah ani. Since I come from Noah, this is the deja vu, and therefore I must come along and rectify it. And therefore, it was a tremendous moment, not only for Moshe, but for, more importantly, for his Gilgul. Now watch this. How many generations from Moshe to Noah, Noah to Moshe, how many generations?
17.
Yes, 17. I'll tell you how we figure it. From Noah to Abraham is 10. Including Noah, Abraham is 11. So count Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kehat, Amram, Moshe. So Moshe is G17, generation 17 from Noah. Right? Listen to how the Mekubalim learned the Pasuk. Boy la teva. We're going to save you, Noah, but not because you deserve to be saved. Ki otecha ra'iti tzaddik lefanai. There's a tzaddik that's going to be ahead of you, lefanai. In which generation? Bador hazeh. Hazeh is hair, zayin hair. 17. Ki otecha ra'iti tzaddik lefanai bador hazeh. You're going to be saved not because you deserve to be saved, but because Moshe is going to make a tikkun for you. So therefore, you get credit. When Moshe Rabbeinu was born, what does the pasuk say before his mother put him in a teva? Vatere oto ki tovhu. Tov is 17. The mother saw, oh, he's 17 from Noah, put him in a teva. So therefore you see Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom makes this tremendous tikkun. It's amazing. Beautiful. Now let's go drop further, boys. Famous Gemara on Horayot. Olives make you forget. Olive oil, good for memory. It's Gemara. You got it again? Zayit, Meshakeyah, Shemen Zayit, Tov the Zikaron. And the Gemara gives a remez. How are you going to remember this? Yafeh koach haben mi koach ha'av. Sometimes we say the father is better than the son. In this case, the son is better than the father. Because what's the offspring of the olive? The olive oil. Right? It comes out of the olive. So therefore, in this case, we say Yafeh koach haben mi koach ha'av. In this case, the offspring is better than the father. The father makes you forget. Olive. The offspring makes you remember. What's the pshat in that? I always thought it's the pshat. That's what it is. It's one of these sigulot of shas.
Shemen Zayit.
Right. Shem and Zayit makes you remember, and Zayit makes you forget. Oh, I thought it's inyan siguli. You can't ask on this over here. It's one of those things. Now, by the way, the New England Journal of Medicine has not yet come to this truth. So none of you should say, well, has this been proven scientifically? As a general rule, the science and academia is about 5,000 years lagging the Talmud. So therefore, they'll come to it, but just it take them about 5,000 years to come to it. And then when they come to it, they'll think that they invented this Hadush. They'll say that a 2-year-old yeshiva knew this already from the Tisa Matan Torah. But put that on the side. So it's unbelievable pshat. It's based on something I heard from my rabbi. There's a Mishnah Pirkei Avot that says, Im lamadta Torah harbeh, if you learned a lot of Torah, which I hope you boys are learning a lot of Torah in college, Im lamadta Torah harbeh, al tahazik tova la'atzmecha. How do you learn that, boys? Al tahazik tova la'atzmecha. The simple pshat is, don't pat yourself on the back. Don't say, oh, I'm learning. Ki lekach no tzavta. That's what you were created. So when you're patting yourself on the back, that's your purpose. It's like when a plumber comes and fixes the pipe, and he says, "Oh, I fixed the pipe." Azak Baruch, what do you do? You're a plumber. Should we make you a testimonial dinner? That's what you are. So when a guy comes, "Oh, I learned." But my rabbi explained it differently. He explained like this.
Who?
Acham Baruch ben Hayim. He was a student of Acham Za'atiyah from Purat Yosef.
No way.
Yes, Habruta b'Acham Avadia alav shalom. So when they were learning in yeshiva. So he said like this: Im lamata Torah harbeh, al tahazik tova la'atzmecha. Don't hold it for yourself. Share the wealth. Teach it to others. The purpose is not only to fill yourself up. The purpose is now, even though it's a sacrifice to give it over to others, because you know it already. So therefore, when I'm giving it over to others, I can be learning myself. So I'm really sacrificing myself a little to benefit others. Simple case, because this class I know already. It's downloaded in my brain, I know it. You don't know it. Now, by me repeating this class, for me it's a loop on the record. How much did I gain from it? I'm not saying anything that I didn't know yet. I could have been in the Beit Midrash and learned a new Daf Gemara, download new information. But the Rab said, that's not what God wants. God wants you to download and then give out, even though you might have to sacrifice from your own level. Adam le'amal yulad. Simple pshat. Man was created to toil. Says the Rab. Le'amal, l'shet tivot. Lilmod al menat lelamed. Le'amal. I want to ask you a question, boys.
What's the name again? Sorry.
Le'amal. Lilmod al menat lelamed. To learn with the intent to teach. The menorah, which is light, represents wisdom. Always light represents wisdom. Bright idea. Remember the cartoons when you were young, the light bulb goes off in his head? Right? Without the sound effects. Illuminating.
Alumni.
All these words represent, enlightening. It's bright. So therefore, the menorah represents light, wisdom. And the fuel that brings that light is the olive oil. Now, an olive is a selfish fruit or vegetable. Why? It holds the oil inside. It doesn't share it. The olive has the oil contained inside. Whereas olive oil represents one that is willing to give up of himself, because to get the olive oil out of the olive, you have to crush the olive. But what's the benefit of crushing the olive? People benefit from what comes out of it. The olive holds it for himself. It doesn't. He's a tzaddik for himself. Noah would be an olive. Moshe would be Shemin Zayit. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't care for himself. He's willing to ruin his own reputation for the people to benefit. And Noah says, I'm good. That's why, boys, when the flood was over, what did the Yonah bring to Noah? A Zayit. As if to say, Noah, don't be so happy. You see this destruction of the whole world? Because you're like a Zayit. You weren't willing to give yourself up for the people. And therefore, you know what the tikkun of Noah is? Moshe. V'yikhu elecha. Moshe, you need to take the Shemin Zayit because you proved yourself that you're willing to crush yourself and lose yourself to benefit the people. And therefore, what the Yonah was telling Noah about the Zayit, you are going to fix it with the Shemin Zayit. Because your tikkun, Moshe, from Noah's sake, is Shemin Zayit. Benefit the people. And therefore, specifically in Parashat Tetzaveh, that's where you see the Mesirut Nefesh of Moshe, where his name is missing. He was willing to go missing. Dafka in the parasha where he's missing is Tetzaveh, where we mentioned the Shemin Zayit, the tikkun of Noah, but Dafka is here. Noah, you weren't willing to go missing. In Tetzaveh, Moshe's name is not because he said Mehanina, something Noah was not willing to say. And therefore, Dafka in Parashat Tetzaveh, where we see the Mesirut Nefesh, Moshe's olive oil, Shemin Zayit. Moshe says, crush me, but the people will enjoy what comes out, the results. Noah, on the other hand, Zayit. And what is the difference between Zayit and Shemin Zayit? Which word is the difference? They both have Zayit. What's the key word difference? Shemin. So Moshe is the Shemin. Says the Arizal, Shemin Rashi Tevot, Shet Moshe Noah. That's the sword of the Shemin. Shet Moshe Noah. No coincidence. That's the Gilgul of Moshe. Stavka not in the Zayit part of it. The Zayit is not impressive. And that's why the Zayit makes you forget. Because if you're just going to learn Torah for yourself and you're selfish, that Torah not going to stick. But there's a special Siyata D'Shmaya. If you learn Torah with the Kavanah to give it over, even though you're sacrificing yourself and your time and your, energies, so what? Shemin Zayit. What it represents is Lilmod al menat lilamed. Then you have already a zikaron. That already gives you. So the lesson of Parashat Tetzaveh in the Elecha is threefold. Number one, v'yikro Elecha mashgiach. Check the oil to make sure it's zach, quality control. Elecha, like the Meshech Chochmah said, there's a benefit directly to you, Moshe, as long as the menorah is lit and there's light, you will have prophecy. Because Moshe Rabbeinu receives prophecy not only by day, says the Ibn Ezra, but by light. And the third pshat, v'yikru elecha Shemin Zayit. Moshe Davka, you take the Shemin Zayit to mitaken what the Yonah was trying to tell Noah. The Yonah told Noah, Zayit. But your Shemin Zayit. Where do we see Moshe Rabbeinu's Shemin Zayit? Just look, he's not in the parasha. That shows us he was willing to be erased. Meheni otiyot me Noah. Meheni na otiyot mi Noah ani. Nechoshet ve'ata. Noah shet ve'ata. Shemin. Shet. Moshe Noah. And that is the deeper of the explanations. From here you see, like it says in the Hazan, Tehillim, Gal enai ve'abita niftot b'toratecha. There's so many secrets. Who would have thought that now you leave the class and some of your colleagues will say, what did the rabbi talk about? Parashat HaShavua. Oh what? Tetzaveh. Yeah, but what was the main theme? I don't know. Noah. What was he drinking? What did you put in his tea? How do you get to Noah? You start to understand that without introducing Soda Gilgul and things like that, you really won't know the depth of what's taking place here, and that's only one word. So don't let anybody ever fool you and say there's nothing to say over in Parashat Tetzaveh. These parashah, like every parashah, is just a matter of how far or how deep you want to dig. But wherever you're going to dig in the Torah, there's always going to be a, no pun intended, there's always going to be oil. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Okay, well, came a night early, so that's it. You got it.